Lane Frost walked into the Mesquite Arena not knowing he was about to face the most feared bull in rodeo. Devil's Nightmare has thrown 156 riders in under 6 seconds, the announcer boomed. A young cowboy from Oklahoma just tipped his hat. What happened next became rodeo legend. Subscribe and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Have you ever taken on a challenge without knowing what you were getting into? Let's ride. The dust hadn't even settled from the previous ride when Lane Frost walked through the gates of the Mesquite Championship Rodeo that Saturday night in 1985. The 22-year-old cowboy from Atoka, Oklahoma, carried his gear bag with the casual confidence of someone who'd been doing this since he could walk. The arena buzzed with an electric tension that seemed thicker than usual, but Lane was too focused on finding a good spot to set up his equipment to notice the unusual crowd gathering around the stock pens. "You picked one hell of a night to show up, rookie," called out Jake Morrison, a grizzled veteran with more scars than most men had stories. He was leaning against the fence, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee that did little to warm the October chill. "Hope you brought your prayers with you." Lane looked up from adjusting his bull rope, genuinely puzzled. "What's got everyone so worked up? Looks like any other Saturday night to me." Jake's laugh was dry as desert wind. "That black devil in Pen 7 has been making grown men look like children for 3 years running. Devil's Nightmare, they call him. 156 professional riders have tried to stay on that beast for 8 seconds. Not one has made it past 6. The arena announcer's voice crackled over the speakers, cutting through the ambient noise like a knife. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a special challenge ride. Any cowboy brave enough to attempt an 8-second ride on Devil's Nightmare will walk away with a $5,000 bonus." Lane's ears perked up at the mention of the money. $5,000 was more than he'd made in his last 3 rodeos combined. He stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans, and started walking toward the stock pens. The crowd of cowboys parted as he moved, their conversations dropping to whispers. "Where you going, son?" Jake called after him. "To take a look at this Devil's Nightmare everyone's talking about." The veteran cowboy pushed off from the fence and hurried to catch up. "Now hold on there. You don't just walk up to that bull without doing your homework." Tommy Rodriguez spent 2 weeks studying footage before his attempt last month. Still got thrown in 4 seconds flat. But Lane was already at Pen 7, his hands gripping the steel rails as he stared at the massive black bull standing in the shadows. Devil's Nightmare was enormous, easily 1,600 pounds of pure muscle and attitude. His horns curved wickedly, and even in the dim light, his eyes seemed to glow with an intelligence that was both fascinating and terrifying. "He's something else," Lane murmured, more to himself than to Jake, who had arrived breathless beside him. "That's what I'm trying to tell you." Roberto Valdez brought a whole team of analysts to study this bull's patterns. Spent 3 days mapping every kick, every spin, every dirty trick in his playbook. Still couldn't stay on. Lane continued to watch the bull, noting how he moved, how he held his massive head, the way his muscles rippled beneath his black hide. There was something almost graceful about the animal's presence, like a coiled spring waiting for the right moment to release its energy. "You know what I see?" Lane said finally, his voice quiet but steady. "What's that?" "I see a bull that's been studied to death, analyzed, filmed, broken down into patterns and strategies, but nobody's just ridden him." Jake shook his head vigorously. "That's exactly why he's undefeated. You can't just climb on a bull like that without a plan." Lane turned away from the pen, his mind already made up. Sometimes the best plan is no plan at all. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything the veteran cowboys believed about their sport. Word spread through the contestant area like wildfire. The kid from Oklahoma was going to attempt Devil's Nightmare without watching a single second of footage. Veterans who had been competing since before Lane was born gathered in small groups, shaking their heads and placing quiet bets on how quickly he'd hit the dirt. "That boy's either crazy or he's got more heart than brain," Swar muttered Bill Crawford, a former world champion who'd hung up his spurs after Devil's Nightmare separated his shoulder in 3 places the previous year. Lane spent the next hour in his usual pre-ride routine, but there was something different about his preparation tonight. While other cowboys huddled around video monitors studying the bull's patterns, Lane sat quietly on a hay bale, his eyes closed, breathing deeply. He wasn't visualizing techniques or analyzing spin directions. He was simply centering himself, feeling the rhythm of the arena, listening to the heartbeat of the rodeo. "Mind if I sit?" came a familiar voice. Lane opened his eyes to see Cody Lambert, one of the most respected riders on the circuit, holding 2 cans of Coke. "Sure thing." Lane accepted the drink gratefully. "Come to talk me out of it too?" Cody shook his head. "Nope. Come to tell you something my granddaddy used to say. He rode broncs back when they didn't have videos or slow-motion replays or any of that fancy stuff. Just a man, an animal, and 8 seconds of truth." Lane took a sip of his Coke and waited for the wisdom. He used to say that sometimes when you study something too much, you start riding the reputation instead of the bull. You get so caught up in what everyone else couldn't do that you forget about what you might be able to do. The 2 men sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the controlled chaos of the contestant area around them. Riders taped wrists, rose in gloves, and worked through nervous energy in their own ways. "You know what the weird thing is?" Lane said suddenly. "When I looked at that bull tonight, I didn't see a monster. I saw an athlete, a competitor, just like me." The arena announcer's voice boomed across the facility. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our special challenge ride. Please welcome to Chute 7 riding Devil's Nightmare Lane Frost from Atoka, Oklahoma." The crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers and gasps. Lane stood up, his movements deliberate and calm. He grabbed his bull rope and glove, nodding to Cody before making his way toward the chutes. At Chute 7, Devil's Nightmare stood waiting, his massive frame filling the narrow space. The bull's breathing was steady, controlled, as if he too understood the significance of this moment. Lane climbed the rails and positioned himself above the animal, feeling the raw power emanating from beneath him. "You sure about this, son?" asked the chute boss, a gray-haired man who'd seen more wrecks than he cared to remember. "Never been more sure of anything in my life." Lane began working his rope around the bull's massive chest, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to attempt. Devil's Nightmare shifted slightly but remained surprisingly calm, as if he was sizing up this new challenger who dared approach him without the usual fanfare of fear and over-preparation. "Rope's good," called out his helper, but Lane barely heard him. In that moment, there was only the bull, the rope, and the growing quiet of 10,000 people holding their breath. As Lane lowered himself onto Devil's Nightmare's back, he felt the incredible power beneath him. Muscles like steel cables, a heartbeat strong enough to feel through the animal's hide. But instead of intimidation, Lane felt something unexpected: respect. This wasn't just some mechanical challenge to be solved with strategy and preparation. This was a conversation between 2 competitors who understood what it meant to put everything on the line. "Ready?" asked the gate man. Lane wrapped the rope around his hand one final time, took a deep breath, and nodded. "Let's dance." The gate flew open and Devil's Nightmare exploded into the arena like a force of nature unleashed. The bull's first move wasn't the violent spin to the right that had caught so many riders off guard. It was a straight, powerful buck that seemed to test Lane's balance and resolve. Instead of fighting against the motion, Lane moved with it, his body flowing like water over the bull's massive frame. The crowd's roar was deafening, but Lane heard none of it. In his world, there was only the rhythm of the ride, the bull's heartbeat, his own breathing, the perfect synchronization of muscle and instinct that separated great riders from good ones. Devil's Nightmare shifted into his signature spin, a bone-jarring rotation that had unseated countless cowboys. But Lane anticipated the movement not through study, but through pure feel. "Holy cow!" the announcer screamed into his microphone. "Look at this kid ride. He's making Devil's Nightmare look like a Sunday school pony." At the 5-second mark, the point where every other rider had been thrown, something remarkable happened. Devil's Nightmare seemed to sense that this challenger was different. The bull's movements became even more intense, but there was a strange grace to them now, as if he was putting on a performance rather than simply trying to eliminate another rider. Lane's free arm moved like a conductor's baton, balancing and flowing with each powerful surge. His legs gripped the bull's sides with just enough pressure to maintain contact without restricting the animal's natural movement. It was poetry in motion, a perfect harmony between two athletes at the peak of their abilities. 6 seconds, 7 seconds. The arena had gone completely silent except for the thundering of hooves and the rhythmic breathing of both bull and rider. Even the most seasoned cowboys in the contestant area stood transfixed, watching something they'd never seen before. Not just a successful ride, but a conversation between man and animal that transcended the usual battle of wills. The buzzer sounded. 8 seconds. But Lane didn't immediately jump off. For another heartbeat, he remained mounted, his free hand coming down to pat the bull's massive neck in a gesture of respect and gratitude. Only then did he dismount, rolling away as Devil's Nightmare kicked once more, not in anger, but almost in acknowledgement. The crowd erupted in the loudest ovation in Mesquite rodeo history. Cowboys who had competed for decades stood in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Lane picked himself up from the arena dirt, his hat somehow still perfectly positioned on his head, and walked toward the gate with the quiet confidence of someone who had just proven a point without saying a word. Jake Morrison was the first to reach him as he climbed over the rails. "How in the hell did you do that, son?" Lane brushed the dust from his chaps and looked back at Devil's Nightmare, who was now standing calmly in the arena, his head held high like a champion who had just found a worthy opponent. "You know what the difference was," Lane said, accepting congratulations from cowboys who had dismissed him just an hour earlier. "Everyone else was trying to beat the bull. I was trying to ride him." Cody Lambert pushed through the crowd and grabbed Lane's shoulder. "That wasn't just an 8-second ride, partner. That was 8 seconds of pure magic." As Lane collected his $5,000 bonus and signed autographs for kids who would remember this night for the rest of their lives, Devil's Nightmare was led back to his pen. The great bull moved with the satisfied air of an athlete who had finally been challenged by someone worthy of his reputation. That night changed everything for Lane Frost. Word of his ride spread throughout the rodeo world faster than wildfire in dry grass. But more than the money or the fame or the respect he'd earned, Lane had proven something that would define his entire career. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from overthinking the challenge, but from trusting your instincts and respecting your opponent. The cowboy from Oklahoma had learned to dance with devils, and in doing so had become a legend himself.